Before starting this video, I would like to insinuate the viewer to either watch one of my older videos made a week ago or watch the endless amount of online content for the events that subsequently led to the partition taking place. I do not find a reason for one to watch this video unless one has a bare understanding of what took place prior to this event. Everything must in a way fit each other chronologically and in the right order of events. In the previous video of mine, I gave us a brief synopsis of what the events were that led to the partition of India. I discussed about the rise of Muslim unity and nationalism forming in both the parties, and the desire for an independent state with different goals forming over a gradual period of time with the amalgamation of years of hard work and toil. Now that we got all of that clear, we see the creation of two new dominions, the Dominion of India, then led by Lord Mountbatten, and the Dominion of Pakistan, then led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Both of these countries were given independence following the Independence Act of 1947, which would receive royal assent and officially be implemented August 15, 1947. The two new states formed were Pakistan, West and East Pakistan, and India, not to forget the endless amount of princely states that were left in limbo, until most of them agreed to join the new Union of India. By around the time of independence, there were around 584 princely states in India. That's quite a lot at the time. So clearly, somehow coaxing the Rajas and Ranis of those said princely states would be quite an onerous task. It was eventually left to Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel to partake in such a task. As the then Home Minister of India, it was his duty to somehow reintegrate the hundreds of princely states located throughout the subcontinent at that time. People went as far to consider him as the Otto von Bismarck of India, as much like the architect of the unification of Germany. Vallabhbhai Patel too played an imperative role in unifying the princely states of India. The main fear India had after independence can be considered as a balkanization of the entire subcontinent. Now, what do you mean by balkanization? What exactly is balkanization, and where and when was this term used? Well, much like the conflagrative situation in the Balkans, the INC leaders made sure that India doesn't spiral down into a state of civil war and violence among different communities and powers. It was thus under the new States Department, that Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel took the mantle for the integration of all the princely states in India, and officially was successful at integrating all the princely states with tactful diplomacy. Although Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel was successfully able to integrate these states into the Union, he failed to merge in the Nizam of Hyderabad, Jammu and Kashmir, and the princely state in Gujarat under a Nawab, thus known as Junagadh. Most of these states that failed to merge with the new union would later be integrated with force or through some extenuation or coerciveness. Hyderabad would be forcefully annexed by the Indian Army under the operation known as Operation Polo. The then Nawab of Junagadh originally decided to integrate its territories into that of Pakistan, despite suggestions of Lord Mountbatten to assimilate them into the wider Union of India. On the 16th of September 1947, the princely state of Junagadh unilaterally declared itself to be part of Pakistan and was eventually accepted by the government of Pakistan. This, of course, didn't go well with the Indian government, and the Indian Army would eventually annex the territories as it would serve as a vital part of the Indian Union. Although I won't go into the details as to why the annexation took place, all you need to know is that a similar case happened in the Nizam of Hyderabad as well, and parallels can be drawn according to it. The specific regions that the princely state was from was, to be precise, a part of a wider region known as Kathiawar, which consisted of several princely states barely the size of modern-day districts in India. The entire peninsula known as Saurashtra, modern-day state of Gujarat. The Saurashtra consisted of the modern-day state of Gujarat as well. And although I'm going a bit off topic, we can see that the dire situation when it came to the princely states and the problems faced by the newly formed Union government trying to assimilate them into the vital union of the states. The British Raj, after ceasing to exist, gave the autonomy for several of these princely states to have their own say over whether they should integrate into with the two states or remain independent. I would like to make a quote from the book The Integration of States by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. As many as 46 states in this agency have an area of 2 or less than 2 square miles each. 8 of them, namely Bodadonis, Gandol, Mochopra, Panjabda, Samadhyala, Chabadia, Sanala, Satonones, and Banghadra are just over half a mile each in area. Yet none of these is the smallest state in Kathiawar. The distinction goes to Vejanones, which has an area of 0.29 square miles, a population of around 206 souls, and an income of rupees 500 per year. This quote was directly taken from the book Integration of States by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, which is an absolutely wonderful read, from from a prospect of understanding how these princely states were actually integrated into the wider union. The quote that I just gave you can give you a glimpse of the sheer absurdity of the Indian state following independence. Just so I tell you, all of these shenanigans were located in one peninsula only, meaning the Gujarat, the state of Gujarat, the modern day state of Gujarat. All of this was located in that alone. Now imagine an entire subcontinent in such a precarious state. I would love to make a video on the internal economic structures and how princely states function under the British Raj, but for now, we'll only be delving into the after effects of how these paradigms in the spectrum reacted towards independence. Now that we've talked about the princely states of India and their eventual ascension into the newly independent states of India, we're left with a much more contemplative question as to why the Congress accepted partition in the first place. What made them to eventually agree to the wants of the Muslim League and accept a two-nation theory and the creation of Pakistan? Well, in order to answer that question, one must first think of the state in which the entire subcontinent was in during the wake of nationalism and communal violence, coupled with the massive political turmoil and the newly created agendas for varying parties. The Congress by no means wanted partition. The Muslim League did. The Congress never really supported the two-nation theory in the first place. It regarded everyone as part of the subcontinent under the umbrella of Indian. And Congress eventually complied with the Muslim League demands, with the demands of the Muslim League. If they really do want an independent state for Muslims, there is no choice but to give them one. Clearly, the Congress by the end of World War II and the eventual partition of India was left in a corner to accept partition as an inevitable fate. Partition was at that point an inexorable reality for the entire subcontinent. All that mattered now was how it actually went. The division of India on the basis of religious connotations is a subject of great controversy and debate. What went behind the lines on a sheet of paper inside a room filled with committee members would forever broil up religious tensions and body disputes ever since both the countries' inception. Following the 1946 Cabinet Mission Plan and the establishment of a temporary interim government, the people of the Cabinet Mission Plan had one goal in common, and that was to create a unified India and oppose a two-nation theory. The federalized system, once lauded by Jinnah, would now be lowered down into regional autonomy, and the different provinces throughout the subcontinent had the liberty to establish their own subordinate unions. Hence why we have subdivisions A, B, and C. The main problem lay with the representation of Muslims in the communal allotted seats. The Congress insisted to add 1 per 5 seats, which in turn would make the Muslim League be able to only add in 4 of their members. After vehemently opposing such a deal, the Muslim League denounced them as traitors to the wider cause. It became clear that the League crossed the Rubicon then. They would later go on to declare Direct Action Day on the 16th of August, which would incite terrible riots throughout the subcontinent, especially in Noakhali, Calcutta. Later that May, they eventually agreed on the partition of Punjab, and also the Viceroy would be shifted from Lord Wavell to Lord Mountbatten that following year. It was under his proceedings that the partition would later take place. The period following partition can be described as tumultuous on literally all sides of the subcontinent. Although we see the main crust of it happen near the borders and parts of northern India, We see several resistance movements and struggles take place in South India as well, like the Travancore people struggle, especially in Punapur and Vailar, Vailar region, and the Telangana peasant revolt. The proposal and the eventual demarcation of the two nation countries would be under the control of the Border Commission, then led by the lawyer Cyril Radcliffe. The Boundary Commission consisted of two Muslims and two non-Muslim judges in each case, and worked under serious constraints. Radcliffe, with very limited knowledge of India and with the use of out-of-date maps and census materials, was required to draw the boundaries and decide disputed points within a period of 6 weeks. This quote was taken from A Brief History of Modern India by Rajiv Ahir. Besides religion alone, there were clearly several other factors put into account. While the partition borders were being demarcated, geographical topography, administrative units, communication lines, which I'll be primarily talking about in the next chapter. Things such as railway tracks, cable lines, telecommunication centers, infrastructure, all of that had to be taken into consideration while the borders were being demarcated. The report of the Boundary Commission was ready by August 12th, but Lord Mountbatten intentionally made it public after the August 15th, so that the responsibility of the consequences, communal rights, and its repercussions would not fall on the British. It would later be seen that Cyril Radcliffe, the main man behind the partition, would, although not the sole one, would not accept his 40,000 rupees as a remuneration for his work. And this conspicuously had to do with the dire consequences arbitrarily created after the borders were announced. Wow, we finally reached the part where the truly horrifying stuff happens. Clearly, I won't be able to note down and analyze all the in-depth nuance this event had on millions of people of different kinds from both countries. Unlike most professions and unlike most professors and sagacious historians would, but I'll try my best to attempt in doing so. Any mistakes can be clarified and will be rectified in the comments. The partition was in many ways a multispectral event. It clearly is much more subtle than what meets the eye, that being the migration of millions of different people from one place to another in an almost exodus-like scale. Just to crunch down the numbers on how many people actually migrated from one place to another, it is estimated that approximately 14.5 million people wound up leaving their settlements for another one, making this by far the worst humanitarian crisis known to date. Quite obviously, the partition didn't just happen without any preparation, of course, but clearly it is obvious by then that the hastiness of it cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of innocent people. Hastiness in the sense that the partition could have in many ways been mitigated if it had been done more prudently by the Border Commission, for example. But the boundaries both the countries wound up with would scar the history that followed. Communal warfare was an inevitable factor at this point, with riots sprouting up throughout India. The police force and the army in general were not really separated at that point, and they were tasked to quell or stop the communal riots from taking place, which, as you may know, didn't work out to their fruition. Now, the partition would have clearly caused a huge refugee problem, the biggest of its kind, to be precise. So how do you think this would have been quelled by any means? Well, in order to answer that question, you must first notice the various partition committees that were established by both the Indians and Pakistanis. For example, the Punjab Border Committee was established on the June 16, 1947. After contacting Mountbatten about it, he later on complied. There were several key factors that had been settled before August 15th, such as the division of finances, military and office equipment, not to forget the connection of and administrative centers as well. The Punjab Boundary Force developed in June and was fully in operation on July 1st, 1947, had 10 to 15 battalions, each from India and Pakistan. This was in order to rehabilitate the newly arrived migrants and stop communal riots from happening. When the boundary award was officially announced, the number of number of migrations from country to country was extraordinary in numbers. Millions took the streets, railway tracks, and in some cases even boats and ferries to get to their desired homeland. When it came to the non-government responses to the partition that took place, there were many. The UCRW, United Council for Relief and Welfare, with main participants being Lady Mountbatten, Edwina Mountbatten, Lord Mountbatten's wife, being Lord Mountbatten's wife, Mr. Casey Neogati, Minister for Refugees, Mrs. Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, Minister for Health, Dr. Jivraj Mehta, Secretary Ministry of Health and Director General of Health Services. Health Services, Mrs. S.K. Kripalani, Secretary Minister of Refugees, and Mr. C.N. Chandra, Refugee Commissioner. The Health Minister will later comment that some aid was received from the Indian Red Cross. Similarly, we see the effort of several foreign aids given to the countries in order to appropriately aid and rehabilitate people arriving to their preferred country. Not only that, but we see the YMCA and NCC play a role in this process too. By around the fall of that year, hundreds of thousands of camps were established at the borders of both countries, with long convoy lines extending down miles and crowding most roads. Several people, whilst migrating, had to reside in camps, otherwise known as concentration camps, in Pakistan, where they lived in an almost impecunious state with scanty shelter and squalid lifestyles. This was indeed the real reality of the partition at face value. Now we go to part 3, humanitarian respondents. There were indeed multiple aiding missions made by the IRC and several other correspondents. The IRC would play a role during the partition by providing funds and supporting aid from both sides. The Pakistani Red Cross would go on to form its own organization in order to provide aid and supply for the recently arrived immigrants from India. The St. John's Ambulance Brigade supported transport for medical personnel and supplies in both India and Pakistan. The British Red Cross sent substantial material supplies too. Even the US government went as far to provide aid and support during the partition. This was in many ways not an isolated event, as numerous aid and support through all the by no means in any sufficient amount. Clearly, this was a international event. Many foreign aid was actually supposed. Numerous foreign aids were actually supported and further given to various organizations throughout the partition. Despondency was vast and rampant across both countries, but the various efforts of the Red Cross and several other organizations like the Women's Conference, the Congress Central Relief Committee, the Kasturba workers played prominent roles in moderating the miseries of the camps in Delhi and elsewhere by raising funds. We see the valiant efforts made by these people that need to be recognized and appreciated overall. The International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, surprisingly played an appallingly minor role throughout the longevity of the partition. The lack of involvement has been noted several times, with them overall only sending a delegate or two. The involvement they had in post-war Europe, as well as the modern day parts of Israel and Palestine, as well as they were trying to extenuate or mitigate the Israeli-Palestine conflict and the migrations and all of that happening then, which had then left them with a lack of funds and the appropriate money in order to pay and finance any missions to India and Kashmir. Another humanitarian aid was provided by the FCU, a British charity organization that played a role in the Indian relief effort. It not only provided relief in Noakhali and 1943 and 1943 Bengal famine, but also did so during the partition period as well. Administrative changes and economic changes, Part 3. Now that we've made clear about the humanitarian factors during partition and how involved the rest of the world was during the entire humanitarian crisis, we now look at the several administrative changes and economic differences seen during the partition and the proceeding of the Indian Independence Act of 1947 passed by the British Parliament. When it comes to the administrative undertaking of the partition, we must first note that by 1947, the Partition Committee would be replaced by the Partition Council that had Lord Mountbatten as the main chairman with plenipotentiaries from both sides of the party. People such as Rajendra Prasad, Rajagopalachari, and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. The Muslim League, on the other hand, was represented by Liaquat Ali, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and Abdul Rab Nishtar. When it came to the real administrative setup, it was primarily run by steering committees. The steering committees, on the other hand, acted as a link drawn between expert committees and the Partition Council. Only a handful of delegates were allowed in such an undertaking. It consisted of two officers, H.M. Patel and Muhammad Ali. When it came to the establishment of expert committees, a total of 10 of them were brought about, with each having to submit a resolution to the steering committee so that they can in turn submit it to the Partition Council. The expert committees were insisted by the steering committee on the urgency of the work, and they were insisted to do their work with a much more faster manner. The reason why I am talking about steering committees is because the administrative role they played in India, which is the main premise of the topic. We all know of Indian civil servants and how they played a role in executing governmental needs across the British Raj. The steering committees basically gave the right to autonomy over who and which government they wanted to serve. So that's one of the main reasons for the steering committee, coupled with several others. The existing terms and conditions already predisposed existed by then also. The Herculean task of meeting up to the demands of these government servants was by no means an easy task, and they had to do so in just under a few weeks tops. A transfer office, for example, was set up in the city of Delhi in order to redirect Pakistani governmental servants at Karachi to Karachi. The entire undertaking was near its cessation by the end of October 15th. Most of these government servants were tied up with a string of communal violence and other calamities like floods, for example. The number of Muslim government servants present in India at the time fell precipitously, as most of them opted to go to Pakistan instead. The non-Muslim government servants that opted to go for Pakistan had mostly arrived back in the form of refugees due to the rise of communal disturbances. When it came to executing several of these administrative tasks, it came out as onerous, to say the least, as most of the governmental offices, specifically in Karachi, Pakistan, lacked many of the basic facilities in order to do so. Things such as duplicators, printing machines, or even refrigerators, all of this stuff aforementioned were hard to come by. When it came to the liquidation or the distribution of different assets, then held by the central government, this initiative of dividing assets based on territorial land was done by the No. 2 Expert Committee. Things such as railway tracks, telephone lines, laboratories were all divided based on territorial land alone. If any said asset were to be in either of the two countries' dominions, it rightfully belonged to them. It was that simple. Now a question might arise from all of this. Don't you think that the main arteries, i.e. the telephone cables, the different railway tracks, would be distributed and destroyed following the partition occurring? Well, the answer is no. It wasn't destroyed because both of the newly established countries decided to come to a consensus regarding that. The postal service, for example, would run fine and well till 31st of March 1948. The railway tracks and other cable connections that acted as a connection connecting NWFP to India would later be realigned and redirected again on the basis of territory alone. Clearly, due to the hastiness of partition, there came to be an eventual stipulation between the two that there had to be some pocket of time for the liquidation of assets as well as a redistribution of several cable networks as well as railway tracks too. When it came to fiscal resources, for example, there was no clear partition. There was no clear agreement that could be drawn between the two new countries in order to make sure who was responsible for the liabilities as well as cash balances in order to maintain credit and overall cash balance. The Indian government as well as Pakistan's one decided to share revenue all the way till 31st of March 1948 when it came to the arena of income tax alone. As for the economic distribution and well-being of both of the countries, the Partition Council agreed on the fact that both shouldn't disturb the interim government status quo due to the sheer intertwines shared between the two countries' economies. This, of course, had to go all the way till the 31st of March 1948. Any tariffs, import taxes, export duties, or anything as such couldn't be changed in either of the countries until they consulted each other in order to do so. This was, as said before, an attempt to maintain the status quo economically, at least, between the two newly formed countries. When it came to the nationality of both of the denizens, it became clear that a spontaneous agreement couldn't come about. The Partition Committee even went as far to allow passports of citizens of both dominions to move freely from one country to another with moderate restriction, to say the least. As for the military of the British Raj, soldiers from both countries, the non-Muslims of Pakistan or even the Muslims of Pakistan, were given the autonomy as to whom to serve and which country they wished to move to. By the time of complete independence, each said country had its assets military wise, and they had their own navy, air force, and military as well. Now that I've explained the economic and administrative changes seen after the partition, I would like to wrap this video up. In the next video, I'm kind of left vacillating between which video should I make, whether it be the involvement of India during World War II, or even a continuation of the historical narrative of the partition, except I'll be tilting on a more sociological side than I did for this video. Thank you for watching. Making this video was quite exhaustive, and I'm really tired after making this. I would really love some feedback after making this video. Any criticism or polemics against what I've just said will be greeted with open arms in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. I'll see you in a week or two. It depends on the work I'm currently undertaking, and it feels good. Yeah, thank you.